Welcome to book club. Hello.
We're going to be discussing the book With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo.
You want to give us a summary?
Yeah, With the Fire on High follows Amani Santiago, who is a high school student, an aspiring chef, and a mother.
I really enjoyed reading the book.
Me too.
Yeah.
I read other books by Elizabeth, like The Poet X, and I think all her work is really good, and I really enjoyed this one.
And I'm not a reader, so me saying that I love the book is a huge achievement. But yeah, I thought it was written in a unique way. I've never seen a book written like this, and it was very engaging, and I really loved reading it.
I agree. I'm not much of a reader either, and I really liked the way the book was written. It sounded like a high schooler was talking, and it was realistic, and it drew you in. I really liked it.
I love the book too, and I'm not a big reader like a lot of us here, but I couldn't put it down. It was so great, and I loved how you can hear the main character's voice shining through. It's really nice.
So a little bit about the author. Elizabeth, she's from New York. From a really young age, she has always loved reading, and she was in many poetry slams and due to her love of hip hop and rapping. Her work features a lot of underrepresented groups in literature, and she incorporates a lot of hip hop and rhythm in her work and themes such as race, gender, and equality. With this book specifically, I think the genre would be realistic fiction because although the story is made up, the story does resemble a lot of elements that are real life experiences.
Yeah. And we see that a lot of the girls even in today's society, they have stories like Imani's, right? And it's just a real authentic story.
I think the setting, the way it's described is very authentic and real. This could be a real story, like a nonfiction,
Exactly.
retelling of a story.
Okay, to give a little more detail about the setting, the book is set in Fair Hill, Philadelphia, and it focuses on the young mom, Amani, and her experience going through high school. She's a senior. She also has a daughter, so she attends school at Shamberg Charter, and the book highlights how much Amani loves food and cooking, and it also focuses on how much Amani loves her hood, which basically she refers to as her community and her home. That's the place she loves. That's where she grew up. That's where she wants to be. She wants to leave her mark on her hood, and she also wants to show people that's her home and she's proud of it. So basically, also throughout the setting, you can see how rich the culture is, and the author talks a lot about the individuals that live in her town, and you get to see it a lot for the book, and it's nice to be able to hear it. So it's cool. I like that.
Yeah, and going forward with the conflict of the story, when I was reading it, I personally thought that Person versus Society was one of the bigger conflicts. Just because Imani is a teen mom, and so whenever she goes outside with her daughter, people are like, "Oh, is this your sister?" And she's like, "No, it's my daughter," right? She feels the judgment. She feels society judging her every time she goes out with Imani, but that doesn't make her be ashamed of her. She's very proud of the fact that she's raising Emma, and it's it shows. And it also becomes a main attack point for Imani, especially when we see Pretty Leslie try to embarrass her in front of Malachi, and she goes, "Oh, how's your daughter?" in front of him, and Imani's "Oh, she's doing just fine," she's proud of it. She owns up to it. So I think just a lot of these judgments she faces as a teen mom is what makes Person with Society a bigger conflict in the story throughout the story. But yeah.
I think also, thinking about the conflict Person versus Society, she struggles with people wanting her to identify with one of her identities and not the other, and tries to put her in boxes, and she feels, that conflict with society. I also think Person versus Self is another conflict we see, and her self-doubt and her trust issues because of Tyrone, who is her daughter's father, and even with her own father not being present in her life. I think she's developed a lot of trust issues in herself and in others. You can see the trust issues in herself. She has a lot of self-doubt about if she can financially, sustain her life with her daughter, and you can see her grow throughout the book and, you know, grow in her faith in herself and, you know, that she can succeed, she can make a life for her and her daughter that's fulfilling for her and good for her daughter as well.
Yeah. And then going forth, talking about the characters, we have Imani Santiago, and she's the main character in our book. She is passionate about making food, and she has this talent where she combines flavors in a unique way so that the person who's eating it feels emotional and they like get reminded of all these different types of memories to the point that sometimes they start crying. And I think that's a very unique talent to have, making someone cry by the dishes you make. And then obviously her dream is to become a chef and own a restaurant, which is very, we see that throughout her talent or throughout the book. But yeah, and then
We have Emma, which Emma is actually Amani's daughter, and Emma's nickname in the book is Baby Girl, and basically anyone that's close calls her this, and it's just like her main nickname throughout the story. Emma is really important to Amani, and throughout the story you can see that, and you can feel it by listening to the way the author writes about how Amani feels about her daughter. You can see how important she is when Amani's talking about her to others, or whenever she's thinking about her, you can clearly see it. Amani also has to work a lot to support Emma for like paying for bills at the house and paying for daycare, and you can just see overall how important her daughter is to Amani. And then also another character is Buela, and Buela is basically the main person raising Amani throughout her life. Her dad actually leaves to go to Puerto Rico to focus on himself after Amani's mom passes away when giving birth to Amani. So a lot of the raising responsibilities fall on Buela. And after Amani has Emma, Buela is also like a second mom to Emma because she has to take care of her too, and she's teaching Amani how to raise her into like a strong woman and everything like that. So I think she's a really important character, and she really helps set a path for Amani and gives her strength for raising Emma and going through life.
Yeah, and to go more into Amani's father, Julio, he left her, like you said, when Amani was really young, and he visits once a year, but for all intents and purposes, he doesn't play a father figure in Amani's life. And, you know, like I said, that goes into her having trust issues, but he mentioned that it's just hard for him to be in that place because that's where his late wife passed away.
And then moving on to Angelica, who's my favorite character. She's Imani's best friend. Imani always goes to Angelica for any type of advice. And Angelica has this like talent to just see Imani and know exactly how she's feeling. And I think that bond they have, like sisters, is just a very beautiful thing, and that this is why I love Angelica. And she's also a representative in a sense, whereas she's a lesbian character. She has her girlfriend who plays a role in the story too. Her name is Laura. But Angelica, she loves art and fashion, and she's the best artist there is, and towards the end, she gets into her favorite or her dream school in New York, Pratt Institute, which was her dream, so that's kind of nice.
And then we have Tyrone Palmer, who's the father of Emma. He was very immature and not really involved in Imani's pregnancy. Him and his family wanted her to get an abortion, but we can see that throughout the book, and then at the end he does mature and he starts to be more involved in his daughter's life.
Next we have Malachi Johnson. This is my favorite character in the book.
Mine too.
Yeah, he's a really great character, like for Amani. He is a new transfer student from Newark, and he met Amani in their advisory class and was in the culinary arts class with Amani, and he's really supportive and patient and understanding with Amani, and does not push her, and I think he kind of is the opposite of how Tyrone was to Amani. Yeah, do you have anything more to say about?
I just love how he loves Emma as much as Amani loves her. It's
Yeah.
really cool to see because even though her dad is kind of present in her life, it's nice to see because it helps Amani recognize and reform those like trust boundaries
Yeah.
with her daughter. So it's nice to see.
I agree. It's a great point.
And then finally, we have Chef Paul Aiden, who is the culinary arts teacher at Amani's high school. He's one of my favorite characters only because how much he pushed Amani to become the chef that she wanted to become. He's really hard on the whole class, but without like him being that way, they probably wouldn't have been able to get to where they want to be.
So then moving on to the story itself, there were a couple points in the story where I found it very exciting. One of when Imani was raising money so she can go on her Spain trip for a culinary arts class, and she was so close where she just needed the last 300, which she gets it from her Aunt Sarah that Aunt Sarah gathered from all of her aunts and uncles from her mom's side. So it kind of like connects. I feel like it's a very beautiful moment where she connects with her mom's side of it, which we don't see a lot in the story. And also the $300. Without that, she wouldn't have gone on the trip. That would have given her the experience that makes her want to become a chef or to pursue that passion even more. So I
that
think
also like restores a lot of hope in her.
yes, definitely, because she was so
Very stressed about money.
yeah, she was very stressed. She was at her lowest point, and then the miracle comes in with $300 from her aunt, and everything is all right. This is where we see the change in her too. And then another point is when she comes back from the trip and she's looking through all the college applications. She goes through 2 rejected ones, and before she lands on her Jaxel Culinary Arts program, which she gets accepted into, and she makes the difficult choice of whether she wants to pursue chef or becoming a chef through a program or getting a life experience. But yeah, I think these are the 2 main points that was like more like a climatic event that really changed her life in the story. But yeah, do you guys want to add some quotes that you guys resonated with in the book?
Sure, I'll do mine first. I found my quote on page 66, and I noticed right away, and I connected it to an idea we learned in class about stereotyping and bias. And basically, to give a little background about the quote, this quote that I chose is a conversation that took place between Amani and Malachi, and basically in the quote, Malachi is making an assumption about Amani's race based on her physical appearances, and I wanted to say that these assumptions are not always correct, and later in the quote, I didn't quote this part, but Amani explains to Malachi that she is both Puerto Rican and Black, and she clears up his assumption. So my quote was, "And why, Malachi, do you think I was black? Well, your last name is Santiago, you're light-skinned, and your hair is wild curly. I assumed you were Spanish." So like I said, it just connects to the idea of people making stereotypes and making assumptions about people without really knowing who they are. And Amani went on to explain to Malachi that he was wrong with the assumption he made about her, and she cleared the assumption.
I picked a quote that was kind of in the same section as yours. On page 70, Amani says, "The whole of me is black. The whole of me is whole." I found that really powerful, and I connected it to what we were talking about in class about identities and how every person has so many identities that make them whole, that make them them. And I think it is important to note the whole of me is whole, because just because she has all these identities that make her who she is doesn't mean she's less of one than the other. She is a whole person.
And then the quote I chose was on page 69, and it says, "I try not to be self-conscious about how little Spanish I know, but some days it feels like not speaking Spanish automatically makes me a bad Boricua, one who's forgotten her roots." And I could relate to this. I believe it connects to like the biases. Just because you're part of a certain like culture or race, you're like automatically expected to know the language, and that's not the case. Like sometimes, and people will like view you differently if you like don't know the language and you're considered like bad or rude like towards the culture.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys would like to add before we close off for the day?
I don't think so.
It was just a really good book.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Definitely
Me too.
recommend, and
Yes.
we love how the author makes the voice heard of the main character.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Definitely, yeah.
Great points, guys.
Well, good job on the book. Yes.